The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. It's always nice to go back and to hear Bob Lowry's voice. And this week, I'm going to kick off a best of Bob Lowry. And today, I'm going to have an episode where we talk extensively about borates and using borates in your pool. And are borates a way to solve all of your pool problems? So Bob Lowry will go over this and more in this episode. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro. So my use of borates predates these podcasts with Bob Lowry. I was using borates before they were popular. I was adding them in various ways with the 20 mil Team Borax. You can get that at Target or Walmart or even your hardware store. Problem with the 20 mil Team Borax is it does raise the pH significantly, so you have to lower that down. I've been adding borates to pools lately with the boric acid powder, and I get mine from dudadiesel.com. And this is a powdered form that you can just broadcast into the pool. And I find this to be the most effective way to add borates to the pool. Of course, borate testing is something that is kind of lacking out there. The Spin Touch by Lamont will do a borate test. They also have borate test strips. So, of course, you want to be able to test the borate level in the pool before you add the borates, or when you add the borates, or when you recharge the borates. That's an important factor. And there isn't a lot of testing methods out there, unfortunately, nor are there a lot of pool stores that carry a borate product. There are some manufactured products like BioGuard Optimizer, but you can buy the boric acid powder online. Again, I get mine from dudadiesel.com. But Bob Lowry is going to tackle this for us here, and you're going to listen to Bob Lowry talk extensively about borates and how they can really help your pool care. So I'll let Bob Lowry take it from here. The borate thing we talk about all the time, and I think one of the things that we have to emphasize is that adding borates is not a magic pill to your pool or a magic bullet. So there's things you have to do still after you add the borates to the water, like balance the water, check the LSI. And I think the impression that people get is that when they add the borates to the pool, they're done with their pool care at that point.
Yeah. Well, and I wrote a technical bulletin about that too. Don't just throw some borates in your pool and think your problems are over. And that's exactly the way I felt about it, is that, people are saying, well, I'll put some borates in and I won't have algae anymore. And it just isn't true. You have to still maintain the pool, and there's some things you need to do. And, not the least of which is to keep the right amount of chlorine in the pool. You need to keep the chlorine level either 5%. If you're going to use borate, and you keep the level of chlorine in at 5% of CYA. So you need to do that. And with a minimum of 2 parts per million, because people say, well, I'll just keep the chlorine level or the CYA level at 20. Then I can keep, 1 part per billion of chlorine in the pool. And that's not the way it works. You still need the minimum still needs to be 2.
And I think you wrote about that as far as your cyanuric acid level. Didn't you write that, 30 parts protects 3 parts per million? 50 parts per million protects 5 parts per million.
You need about 10 parts per million for each 1 part per million of chlorine that you're going to keep in the pool.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to put 4 parts or 5 parts per million of chlorine in the pool, you need 40 or 50 parts per million of chlorine.
Of cyanuric acid, you mean, right?
I mean, of cyanuric acid. Excuse me.
And I've done tests before with my pool where I kept it at 10 or 20 parts per million, and it doesn't hold chlorine for nothing at that level.
No, it doesn't. And actually, the problem may be the test itself. The manufacturers that I checked with, 20 parts per million is about the bare minimum that they can accurately say it's okay. And even that level is plus or minus 20%. When you think about it, if you're measuring 15, it's 20% of that. It may be only 10 or 12 instead of 15 like you think it is. I think keeping a low level of cyanuric acid, the minimum level of cyanuric acid you ever need is 20 and probably 30. But if you're going to put 2 to 4 parts per million of chlorine in the pool, you're going to need 20 to 40 cyanuric acid.
And so with the borates in the pool, this is a question I get asked a lot. Is it harder to lower the pH and alkalinity once you have the borates at 50 parts per million? Are you going to use more acid to do that? Because it is a buffer.
Well, yes, actually, the pH won't go up as fast or as high, but once it does go high, it'll take you almost twice as much to go back down. So it technically doesn't save you any acid, but it does save you the time and the height that it's going to go up. That's the advantage to it, is that instead of the pH going to 8 in a week, the pH may go to 8 in 2 weeks. So it doesn't stop it, it slows it down. But then once it gets up there, it's going to take you twice as much acid as it normally takes to get it back down.
And I think that's something that they should know about when they add the borate product, is that it's a good idea to have the pH and alkalinity in range first, your target ranges first, before you add the borate, because then it's harder to lower it down afterwards. Is that correct?
Well, and understand this too. I had a couple of calls this week from people saying, I've added a borate to my pool and it clouded my pool. What happened? And the answer is that there are 3 kinds of borate products you can add to the pool. The one that I recommend using is called boric acid. And when you add it to the pool, it will change the pH of the pool by 0.2 pH, which is barely enough to even test for. And the other thing it's going to do is lower alkalinity by about 5 parts per million, which is also not much that you can check on a test kit. So essentially, adding boric acid does nothing. When you add the other 2 products, which are sodium tetraborate pentahydrate and sodium tetraborate decahydrate, which is borax, when you add those 2 products to the pool, they will increase the pH of the pool to 9, and they will increase total alkalinity by 115 parts per million. To overcome that and get it back to where you started in a 10,000 gallon pool, you will need 2.2 gallons of acid. And so in a 15,000 gallon pool, you need almost 3.5 gallons of acid after you've added either of those 2 products. And this is the only reason that I recommend boric acid. You put it in the pool, you're done. You put borate in the pool, now you got to put acid in there, and you got to and it's okay to put the acid in at the same time as the borate. So you won't have to waste any time, but you're going to need 3.3 gallons in a 15,000 gallon pool if you've added 50 parts per million of sodium tetraborate pentahydrate.
Yeah, so the best method would be to have the pH and alkalinity within the target range and then use boric acid.
Right. And the reason that this guy had a problem was that he had high pH and alkalinity and added the borate product on top of that. And he literally precipitated out some calcium out of the pool.
That's
because that made his alkalinity about 220 or 230, and his calcium was already about 400, and his pH was 8. And if you put that on an LSI, you're going to see it's like 1.2 or something. It's a big number. So the calcium actually came right out of the water.
And so I think the key takeaway is once you add the borates to the pool, lowering the pH and alkalinity will take more muriatic acid if that's the one you use versus before. But then the rise in pH is not going to be as dramatic. So if you had a pool, like I'll use my pool as an example. I have a saltwater generator. Before I put the borates in several years ago, it would be at 8 all the time, almost every week. Even after I added acid, a couple of days later, it'd be up at 8 again. And now with the borates in there, I'm hovering around 7.6, 7.8 all the time. And I add acid maybe once every week, or when I remember, I should say, because my pool is pretty neglected. The cobbler son has no shoes,
Of course.
But I check it every. I have an app. I have actually 3 of the smart monitors in my pool because I'm testing those out.
Right.
And so I check my pH every day because it's on my phone. And I can tell you, it doesn't move from 7.8 all week long. It just stays there pretty
Yeah.
consistently, which before it didn't. So the benefit, I think, of the borate far outweighs any kind of extra muriatic acid you're going to use to lower it, I think.
Well, that's the big advantage is it doesn't go up as fast or as high. It'll take you a little more acid to get it back down once it gets up there, but I think it is a benefit.
Yeah, I just pulled it up on my phone here. It's 7.9 right now today, and I added acid on 5 days ago. So it hasn't gone up much in a week. So I'll probably have to add a little bit more. But these monitors are pretty cool. I think they're the wave of the future, by the way. I have a Fin, I have a Blue Right, I have a Sutro in my pool, and they're all giving me the pH. The Sutro gives me the free chlorine and the alkalinity. So I think for people that just don't have time to check their pool, these things are pretty good. They're not a bad device to have.
Well, I think they're okay, except that I I think you can't maintain a pool unless you know the alkalinity.
Yeah,
And
that's the
and
key.
there's no electronic method for measuring alkalinity. So some of the new methods may be using a mini amount of water and actually measuring alkalinity the same way that you measure it with a test kit. They're just doing it on a micro level. But
Yeah.
you really need to measure the alkalinity because I got guys calling me all the time saying, geez, I keep adding acid and my pH goes down to 7.5 and then it goes right back up. And the problem is their alkalinity is too high and it's pulling out pH up all the time.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's the only drawback with the monitors is that the only one that I know that does alkalinity is the Sutro. And that's the key factor, I think, in any kind of measurement.
And
So
I'm
what's
not
the,
sure, but I think the Sutro is a calculation.
yeah, it is. They use a small minute amount, like you mentioned, and they do like an algorithm of some kind.
Yeah.
But it's fairly accurate because I've measured it against the spin touch, so it's they have it down pretty well. But yeah, it is a small amount of reagent in there, and it's actually the Lamont reagent, ironically.
Right.
So the magic level of borates, this goes back and forth, and I know I mentioned to you before that if you buy a pre-manufactured borate product, the manufacturer has on the label 35 parts per million is their level that they recommend. But that's not the level that you recommend.
No, and it's not the level that's very effective, to be honest with you. I think that 50 parts per million is the effective range. But there is an obscure detail from EPA, and they ran a test and did a bunch of things and produced a 115-page report, and ultimately it said that they wouldn't have any problem with 30 parts per million with a no level of concern, a NOLA, of 150%. So when you take, 30 parts per million times 1.5, you come up with 45. So EPA is saying that it's okay to have 45, but there isn't anything that's going to measure 45. So they agreed that 50 was okay. So 50 is what basically EPA is saying is okay. And that level is still with a level of concern, which is different than the other one, a level of concern of like 6 times. So you could actually keep a whole lot more in there and not have a problem, any serious problem. People sometimes read that NOLA method and come up and say, well, yeah, okay, then we shouldn't be recommending more than what EPA says. So from a legal standpoint, they're telling you that 35 parts per million is what you need in your pool because that's under the EPA maximum.
Got it.
So, EPA also has a maximum of 100 parts per million on cyanuric acid. And you see what we do to that. There is an obscure maximum level of borate in a pool at 50. And I sometimes, with a chlorine generator, recommend a level of 70. And in the original patent that John Gervin got on using borate in water using it in pools in 1984, his patent says that borate at 50 parts per million is an effective algistat. And he actually went on farther and found that 200 parts per million of borate in the water is an algicide, but they didn't want to recommend 200 parts per million of borate in the pool as an algicide. So 50 is in there as a preventative, as an algistat. At any rate, it's effective, and 50 is an okay level. And the folks that you and I both know over at Trouble Free Pools and Richard Falk have been recommending 50 parts per million of borate for probably almost 15 years. I think Ben Powell and those guys over there at Trouble Free Pools first started mentioning using borates in pools in 2007. That would be 14 years ago. I've been recommending myself for 8 years in my publication.
And you mentioned 70 parts per million in the saltwater generator pool. What's the reasoning behind that level?
Well, it's actually just field reports from guys that I trust their knowledge. You know, a couple of guys that have attended my classes have said, you know, I'm a service tech. I got 50% of my pools on borates and chlorine generators, and we're finding that 70 works better than 50. It's just field reports, and obviously because of the patent and the data that's behind the patent, because they did a test at a university using borates, and they did find that at 200 it is an algicide. So the higher you go, obviously the better it is. Mm-hmm. It's just how much do you want to put in there until you think it's safe or whatever. So I think 70 is the maximum I would ever recommend, but I think 70 is a good thing for a chlorine generator pool. I also think that 70 parts per million of cyanuric acid is the right level for a chlorine generator pool too. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that most of the time, when you have that chlorine generator set on maximum and it's pumping out chlorine, it's making more chlorine than there is cyanuric acid near the point of where it's being made in the cell. And so then you have chlorine that's unattached to cyanuric acid getting back into the pool. And it's being dispensed close to the surface of the pool where sunlight degradation is huge. At the surface of the pool, chlorine degradation is 90% in 2 hours. So you can lose a significant amount of chlorine if it's being unattached at the level at the surface of the pool. If you don't have enough cyanuric acid in the water. So we found that 70 is better for cyanuric acid with a chlorine generator pool.
That's interesting. I think you mentioned that before, and explaining it like that again, I think it makes a lot of sense that the way it generates it is the reason why you want to have a higher cyanuric acid level.
You want all of the chlorine that's being made to be attached to cyanuric mm-hmm. acid before it gets to the pool.
And then the borate testing for borates is one of probably the biggest hurdles that people face. Currently, there's the test strips that you can get, and then there is the Spin Touch. They have a disc that does borates also. But besides that, I haven't heard of many other tests for borates in the water.
There isn't. There is a method that I researched and found a method, but nobody ever commercialized it. There was a method that was created, but it wasn't very easy to do, and nobody thought that they needed borate done that much, so it didn't become a priority with any of the test kit companies. Mm-hmm. But the technology for making a test strip was there, and it's easier to make the strip now because practically every manufacturer already makes a strip.
And then mathematically, though, you can pretty much calculate how much borate's in the water based on the gallons of the pool and how much you add. Is that kind of correct?
Yeah, that's how we recommend adding it is, we list the amount of ounces you need for the part per million of borate that you want in the pool. It's like 7.6 parts per million of ounces for each 1 part per million of borate in 10,000 gallons. So you just multiply 7.6 times 50, and that gives you the parts per the amount you need in a 10,000 gallon pool. And then you can multiply that times whatever gallons you have in your pool. So the numbers are pretty easy to come up with. You need 9 ounces for sodium tetraborate pentahydrate and 11 ounces for the decahydrate. So
And how do you remember all this stuff off the top of your head? Because you're not
I
looking at
just
any notes right
my
now.
mind works like a computer, and once the information goes in, it stays there. I don't have an eidetic memory, but I think it's probably close. I just remember things like that because I remember numbers and amounts, and they just float around for me.
So I wonder if you go to Vegas, you can count cards at blackjack.
I looked into doing that once, but then I don't know, I guess with facial recognition, they can see your eyes rolling back and hear that you're counting. So.
Yeah, like the MIT guys that had the little calculator in their shoe, they were able to count the cards. You do it all in your head, which is pretty amazing. I think one thing we should emphasize too is that once you add the borates to the pool, it's kind of like cyanuric acid where it doesn't evaporate out of there, or salt when you add the salt to the pool. And so the following season, you don't need to add, 20 or 30 pounds of the boric acid again, because most of that should still be in the water, right?
Yeah, it only, as I said before, it only reduces when there's a water loss. So it only reduces when you've got a leak, splash out, drag out, something like that, because it doesn't evaporate, so it stays there. So it may go down 5 or 10 ppm over a whole season.
Mm-hmm. Which is not a lot, because then you can just recharge it the following season. And I think I tell pool pros this all the time: when you sell this to your customers, make sure you let them know that this is not a yearly thing that's going to have to be added every year. In most cases, you just have to add a maintenance dose. So at that point, it's an easy sell once you tell the customer that it's not a yearly kind of thing. So I'm all for borates. I think that, although they're not a magic pill, they're not magic in any way.
And people ask me, well, what does it do? And basically it does 2 things. It prevents algae, and it keeps the pH up from going up so fast and so high. And that's all it does. And if you're expecting it to do more, it doesn't do anything.
I guess one last thing it can do is add a little sparkle to the water.
It does do that. We have reports of people saying the water feels silkier, it sparkles more, it looks bluer. I've got a video that John Stankus did that shows him putting the borate in the pool, and on his video you can see the water look different.
Yeah. I've had people come to my house and comment, "Why is your pool so sparkling? I've never seen a pool like that." And it's because of the borates that are in there. I think that does happen in certain situations when the sun's hitting it 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. right above it. You get that really nice sparkle that you don't have before. And if you're looking for other podcasts that I recorded with Bob Lowry, of course you can tune in the rest of this week to hear some of the best of Bob Lowry. You can also go to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. On the banner, click on the podcast icon, and then in the search box, just type in Bob or Bob Lowry, and that'll take you to quite an extensive library of podcasts that I recorded with Bob Lowry. And if you're interested in my coaching program, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro.